Hello. Just testing the sound really quickly. We did a sound check already, but just want to make sure that everybody can hear okay. Can you give us a hi in the chat if you can hear us, please? All right. And maybe I can just ask you guys to just say like hi really quick, just to test the mic so everybody can hear you.
Hello, this is Natalie.
Hi, this is Walden.
Could you hear Natalie and Walden? This is the first time we're doing this. All good. All right, great. Thank you for
responding.
Thank you for responding. This is wonderful. All right, I'm going to be flipping in between this camera and this machine right here throughout. Shall we get started?
Yep.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for dialing in. This is the 6th and, as of right now, final session of our Future Skills Roundtable. My name is Vince. I'm the founder and CEO of Press Start Academy. We are reimagining and developing 21st century skills through play and games. And because we want to bring 21st century skills discourse into the mainstream, that's why we've been convening the Future Skills Roundtable for the past 3 months. So we've started in mid-October, and this is our last session. So super excited. And this is, as you can see, our first live in-person session. So I'm super excited. Thank you to Unspun. You can't see this here, but thank you to Unspun for hosting us and for this super awesome custom airplane programs, like airplane departures signboard thing.
For those that are old enough, yes.
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 So yeah, let's get started. Super excited. So we've been doing this, as I mentioned, this is our 6th session. We have covered the 6 C's of 21st century skills. So in chronological order, in terms of how we have organized the sessions, we have taken care of character, communication, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and now we're going on to citizenship. So let me just set the tone really quickly for tonight's session, and we're going to dive right into learning from these 2 wonderful people. So I'm just going to read off like our event description a little bit. According to the Partnership for 21st Century Learning, 21st century citizenship is defined as children who are civically literate, globally competent, and digitally literate. So as you can see, this is probably the broadest and the most complex of the 6 C's that I just mentioned of 21st century skills. And this encompasses leadership, global awareness, civic literacy, engagement, and digital literacy. For our guests today, all of these also tie in with their vision and their mission. There's a lot to go through. We only have just over an hour, so let's get to it. Here's how it's going to go. We're live in person right now, as I mentioned. This is Unspun's new flagship store in Hong Kong. Congratulations again, super exciting.
Thank you.
So rather than me using slides to introduce our speakers, I'll first ask them to introduce themselves and tell us about what they're working on so they can help contextualize and ground our conversation for tonight. I have a few questions drafted. So I'll just be trying to go through most of them, but of course, if you've dialed in for previous sessions, you know that we want to be as casual and as interactive as possible. So please feel free to drop in comments and questions and reactions and feedback, in the chat or in the Q&A box. We'll be monitoring that throughout. And if there's anything that's relevant and topical, then I'll try to weave that in. Otherwise, we can all leave them towards the end as well. That's about it. All right, so let's get to it. So thank you both for being here. I want to start with just introductions, as I mentioned. I'm going to ask Walden first, if you can kick us off by introducing what you're working on at Unspun with the jeans over there, and your vision for sustainable fashion industry.
Yeah, so my name is Walden, local kid, started Unspun almost 5 years ago now with a mission of reducing global human carbon footprint by 1%. A big part of how we achieve that is we have no inventory, we have no excess stock. I mean, it's making headlines today with the fashion industry, with just the demand-supply mismatch that a lot of fashion brands have to incinerate or landfill their garments. So our first layer impact is to make sure that every piece is created intentionally and there is a customer already for that. And then on the back end, we're also creating a 3D weaving machine. Basically, think of it almost like a 3D printer for clothes, so that we can basically create a zero waste process, so that we don't actually have to cut out the fabric waste, and then we can reuse the materials that come out of the garment recycling process. Yeah, that's in a nutshell what we do.
Cool, thank you. Obviously, we're going to go back to a lot of your work. I'm going to turn to Natalie. Natalie is wearing one hat right now, which is the unspun, the new beanie that they just launched. But I know you actually wear two hats as a social entrepreneur.
I love that
Yeah,
fun.
thank you. See, it's for me, so I do. As a social entrepreneur, focusing on ecotourism, and as a sustainability lead of a multinational company. So could you give us a quick intro or two quick intros of your entrepreneurial project there, as well as your role in retail sustainability?
Great. Thank you so much, Prince, for inviting. And I'm really inspired by your work at Press Start and also inspired by Walden's work at Unspun. I'm Natalie. I graduated with an MPhil in environmental change and management at Oxford around 2 years ago. And then I actually started my entrepreneur project Fair back in 2015 when I was in my first year of uni. And at that time, I just wanted to solve the problem of a high amount of personal per capita carbon footprint, especially from overseas, flying overseas, like because these kind of cross-border emissions are usually not accounted in local government emissions data. So by starting Fair, which is a homophone to the word that means green in French, Fair, we want to kind of reinvent the definition of tourism by incorporating elements of ecological education and climate education into local tourism, bringing Hong Kong people, including school children, to university students, to corporate citizens, to venture into the most biodiverse hotspots of Hong Kong, including our country parks, geoparks, marine parks, etc. And we've been running for around 5-6 years now, and having hosted over 200 tours, benefiting over 10K people with our educational events and tours. And on the corporate front, I also entered the corporate world to understand more about retail sustainability recently. So I'm working for a multinational company. We manage a range of household brands, including Welcome, 7-Eleven, Mannings. So I think a lot of people would imagine or tie it with reducing plastic, but it's not just reducing plastic, but also how we reduce the whole life cycle footprint from beginning to the end. Similar to Walden, they care a lot about manufacturing footprint and waste pollution. We also care about where we source our products and how the farms are producing the goods that we can see in supermarkets or in furniture outlets. So we're looking at a whole life cycle approach by assessing our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So we can also talk more about that later.
Sure, absolutely. Walden mentioned that you're a local, you're also local. I consider myself a local. I think, you both work in sustainability. Everybody who's checking this out from Hong Kong knows that sustainability, unfortunately, not one of the most popular career paths still. So I want to, ask how you both got into this field. And I know the backstories are actually quite diverse. So I'm going to ask you first, Natalie. I know that this has been a calling for you since you're very young. So can you talk us through how that passion, how you first came into this field and how that has, evolved into what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So I was first inspired in primary school when I did a school project focused on climate change. And my teacher invited a polar explorer, Dr. Rebecca Lee, to have an interview session with us. At that time, we went to Dr. Rebecca Lee's office, which was filled with a lot of photographs, images, and also very stunning imageries that she took in the poles, because she was the first woman who's been to the 3 poles from Hong Kong. And she also described to us how the Earth is trapped in a microwave with continually rising temperature. I think that kind of visual representation really engraved in my mind ever since, how we're living in a microwave. And I kind of started pitching that message to a lot of my friends, like, and peers, families around me. But at that time, climate change was not a hit topic. I think people were still talking a bit about global warming, but not framing it as climate change, extreme weather events, etc. Since then, I started following news related to geography, and I decided to pursue geography from my high school and university, and eventually pursuing a master's in this area as well. Of course, along the journey, there were lots of setbacks and challenges. People around me would say, what are you going to do with a geography degree? But I think the most important thing is to just stay true to what you're really passionate about, and understanding, like, just listening to your own calling and thinking how you can contribute positively to the planet.
I love how this just turned into career advice. So listen to your calling, listen to your passions, okay? Speaking of listening to your passions, I know that Walden has had like a quite diverse background before, working in corporate, in hospitality, and also in apparel, actually. So can you walk us through how that has developed into what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, the diversity of experience is just a function of how old you are. You know, it's
That's
just,
fair.
you know, if you have many years of work experience, you just naturally have more diverse. I think I probably got exposed to climate issues at a similar absolute time scale as Natalie, but I was like significantly later in the stage of my
Absolute time scale.
career. So it was like 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And like all kids in Hong Kong was thinking of like going through the more conventional path, like banking, consulting. During that time, a lot of the career options were closed, and I got thrown into consulting, and my first ever project was for China Light and Power, the utilities company. They were preparing for COP15 Copenhagen climate conference, and they want to prepare for the strategies and the different scenarios and the risk compliance, all of those. And so that was my first exposure to climate issue. And for me, it struck me as an issue that almost seems impossible to solve, because you are trying to incentivize people to take action that doesn't go back to them directly. Like if you like the externality part of it, it's almost structured to fail. Like and so yeah, that struck me as a very, very immense problem to solve. And then through consulting, I was brought into supply chain and all the waste issues. And when I had the chance to found my company with my two other co-founders, just connected the dots of, you know, the climate urgency and the supply chain side of it to start and so.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think we're probably going to return back to that point of just this is a super huge problem, right? It's almost structured to fail. So I guess I want to ask, like, my next question is on vision and mission. And I think that ties in really nicely, because why are you doing this when it is structured to fail? So I'm quite curious to know about, you know, you've talked about the problems that you're trying to solve, but number one, why are there problems? Why these are problems to be solved in the first place? And maybe just a little bit of self promotion. Why are you the best people to solve the problems that you're solving? Let's start with Walden.
I'll start with the last part. I don't think necessarily I or we are the best people to solve for the particular problem that we're solving. I think we just happen to be the ones that are still like kind of standing to solve the problems. You know, this issue needs to be solved. Kind of like you look around, no one else is really taking meaningful, tangible action, and it's just the will side of it. The particular issue that we are trying to solve is this waste problem. I think like past industrial revolution, you know, we were just operating in the world where like we just need to get cheaper and cheaper with scale. And that also means that you have to produce at, you know, outsourced locations, and you have to produce at significant volume. And when you do that, and when you have a very complicated supply chain, you typically end up having to wait like 12, 15, 18 months ahead of time before products are available, at least in the fashion supply chain, that's the case. And so like if you have to forecast 18 months from now, you know, what demand would look like, you know, what consumers would want, in what color, in what size, it's impossible. And so yeah, so that's, you know, the problem that we're solving, because the entire production process of garments is already pretty damaging. And like, if you imagine that, and then actually at the tail end of it, you're actually throwing away by incinerating garment, it's kind of crazy. So yeah, so that's why we're focused on that. Coming back to the mission side of it, when I started, I think I was just like looking back, connecting the dots. Now the young family of a daughter that's like 4.5 years old, I think now the mission part of it becomes a bit more selfish. It's like, oh wow, like what I do has implications beyond my own lifespan, and my daughter has to bear the consequences of kind of our generations or previous generations. So am I doing everything in my power to change? Of course.
I wonder if that's something that's also applicable to you. What makes you the best person to solve the ecotourism problem, and why does it need to be solved in the first place?
Yeah, I definitely don't think we are the right person or like the only person to solve this problem. But I think at that time, back in 2015, there weren't a lot of talks around local tourism, or local tourism is kind of branded as something that's just hot or not, just eating, drinking, and buying stuff. But nobody really realizes the value of Hong Kong as a biodiversity hotspot, or as a very geologically diverse place that has a lot of assets and valuable resources for people to showcase, understand, and explore. So at that time, we really wanted to kind of reframe the concept of tourism by integrating like ecological elements in it, and also like promoting it as something that's very cool and fun for the general public. We wanted to become the first interface, or the first step for people to understand about the environment, because we realized that in some of the schools that we have surveyed in, even some secondary school students who are 15 and 16, they have never been to a country park in their entire life. And it was at that point I felt I was quite privileged, because my parents have been taking me to country parks since a very young age for fun, for barbecue. But some people, they are so constrained in the urban area, built up area of Hong Kong, which literally only takes up around 10% of the entire Hong Kong. And there's still 70% of Greenbelt that has been unexplored. So that was kind of the initial mission for us, to showcase the beauty of Hong Kong to more people. And I think at the time of like 2015 to 2019, it was also a period where localization was happening as a term, or as a hit phrase, but people don't really understand the value of being local. They say they love Hong Kong a lot, but what do you actually like about Hong Kong? Like, do you like Hong Kong as an international financial center, or do you like Hong Kong for our cultural rootings, for our heritage, for our rural areas? So this was another kind of motivation from us, because we think you can only conserve what you see and what you love. And by really pushing people, forcing them to go out to nature, we can rebuild that nature-human connection that has been long lost in the urban setting of Hong Kong. And I think in recent years, we are focusing more on rural revitalization, because we see a lot of rural villages, they have immense potentials to develop, but how we're developing it requires an intensive interrogation and stakeholder engagement with the local villages, with the indigenous villages. Even though a lot of them have moved away, they still believe that they have a stake in those rural area and the future development of that. And they want to be part of, to share the benefits, to share the growth potential of these rural areas like Kok Po, Lok Keng, Lai Chi Wo, Yim Tien Zai. So we've been working with local stakeholders on these projects and curating new tours around these areas by involving and engaging and even training some indigenous villages as tour guides, so that they can also be empowered and gain a part of the revenue from this ecotourism development.
I'm going to throw you a left field question. Walden said he's doing it for his daughter. Who are you doing it for?
I'm doing it for the planet. I think people tend to have this concept that environmental protection stuff are only like people, for example, green groups are responsible for the environment. But I think this concept is really wrong because everyone inhabits on the planet and we are all crew. We're not just passengers on this spaceship Earth, like this famous quote thing. So I think we need to reinstate this value or this kind of perception. Everyone is a part of this. We're all in this together. It's not that we throw this responsibility to all the green groups because they are designated to do it, but we are doing it for our shared planet. And if we're not doing this, we'll just face another tragedy of the commons, like everyone keeps polluting and the externalities nobody cares about.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions that go into other sides of citizenship, but since we have two climate experts here, I'm just going to riff off of what we've talked about. And I think this is a good time to bring in one of the questions that's been submitted, which is,
wow, there's so many questions.
How do we get kids to connect to climate change on a personal, local level? So I'd love to hear both of your thoughts because this is a global problem, but how we make people aware and participate in the change-making process needs to be local. And you're obviously doing a lot of local things. Walden does a lot of the retail side of things, and you're making that process real. You're making that products and the outcome of that process real. So what are the steps to getting people to connect and understand? I mean, in Hong Kong, we're pretty blessed. Like we don't feel like the immediate effects of extreme weather as much.
Yeah.
So yes, exactly. But how do you get people to realize that? How do you get people to understand? And then there is a difference between awareness and action, right? So what is that theory of change for you both? Let's start with Natalie.
Yeah, I guess for us, it's pretty simple. Just bringing your kids to nature and to start speaking to them about the interconnectedness of different parts of nature. For example, when you come across a tree, how does that connect with your daily life? For example, some of the trees, they supply medicines, they provide a pool of genetics, how they become furniture that we use at our home. So I think drawing these kind of connections and intersections really help the kids understand that humans are dependent on nature to thrive and to sustain into future generations, and how a lot of our routings are based on something derived from nature. Another point is how what we're doing would impact nature, and that brings to the creator to creator approach, like thinking circularity. When you're buying products, when you're just taking kids out to shopping, you can explain to them how it links with the supply chain, like some of the issues. For example, you can point to a farm and tell them how the rice you're eating now has been processed from this farm through such a long and complex process, and how our behavior eventually influences how brands work, how brands brand their products. So I guess it's just understanding your consumption behavior and choices is linked to the climate. And on the climate front, I guess, as we're seeing more extreme weather events, by showing your children some of the imageries or even some of the video news clipping of extreme weather events happening around the world. In Hong Kong, even bringing them to do some site visits. There are more climate justice visits nowadays organized by Oxfam and Carbon Care and Lab. They host community dialogues and even home visits to subdivided flats. You can speak with people who are facing energy poverty, who are facing extreme heat waves because they're living in rooftop housing. I think getting these experience would really generate our empathy and understand how our actions are connected with local climate justice issues.
So there's a lot of you talk about transparency and speaking to stakeholders who are affected and looking at the process, agriculture and stuff. Does that work in retail, within what you're doing in terms of gene manufacturing? Because obviously I'm imagining it's going to be quite hard to bring people inside a factory to look at the actual production process, right? So how do you communicate your messaging, Walden?
Yeah, I really like the last part of what Natalie mentioned about like the people that are impacted. I think we're probably at the brink of seeing huge waves of climate refugees having to leave homes because of extreme weather patterns. So I think that's just as powerful of an image and a narrative that you can create. On the retail side, sadly, no, you actually can't do too much of that because there is an inherent tension between consumption and sustainability. Like I talk here all night about sustainability. None of what we do is sustainable just because we are still, using resources to create. So I think we're lesser evil, but we're nowhere close to, like, sustainability is an ultra high bar when it comes to anything within consumer market. I think that the best way is to create a product that's just so good that, like, you create a product that's so good and you do all the homework to make sure that you're not greenwashing, you're making you can quantify the impact and you're doing all the homework. And by incentivizing the consumer to pick the better product, better experience, you're ultimately making an impact. I was just hosting a family here over the weekend, and the kids, they were just like exploring around. I mean, it's quite tech forward. And they were really interested in the laser machine that we can do customization on. Show them the laser machine, create a bag for them, and they were super intrigued. And I'm not boasting about technology, but I think you just need entry points that are just inherently fun and exciting. And then once you've gotten people's attention, then you can do the education part. I think with retail, the tough part with education is that you try to preach hope, like this is organic cotton, this is hemp, this is better for you. But if the product itself is not appealing, then you're just not going to ever make an impact.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, Walden, which is connecting the dots after you find the problem. In our session on creativity, we spoke about the innovation process and problem solving, and how do you start? Do you start by thinking about the problem and the users, and at what point do you start thinking about what you can do about it and what the solution is, and how do you iterate on that? So I want to ask you both about how you connect the dots, because Walden, you're focusing on fashion waste. There are multiple different ways that multiple different companies are approaching the same problem. So how did you arrive at what you're working on right now? Was it like there was a eureka moment? It's like, hey, I really got to work on this thing. Then it's going to be called Unspun. Or was it like an iterative process? If it was an iterative process, what were the iterations throughout?
Yeah, I mean, I was brainwashed in the whole kind of like ideation process as well. And I was like, during that time, I was also trying to quite, rigidly apply what I learned there. There you learned that you should just focus on a pain point and like empathize and try to create a persona that you're designing for. And now we're talking about mega problem, right? We're talking about climate issue. Climate really doesn't have a single user, right? So like, how do you connect the dots between the two sides? I think a lot of what's not talked about in the kind of design thinking process is the prototyping, because it's the part that becomes super messy. There is no standard formulas for creating prototype. This store started out 5 years ago with a prototype store that's 5-minute walk away from here, 5,000 Hong Kong dollars. I invited a bunch of my friends, 30 people. They all paid, I think, $300 for a pair of jeans. And that was how Unspun got started. It was messy. Our jeans were not great. But it shows that there's a pain point. Our product wasn't just great enough to scale at that point. And then we went through the iteration of what this looks like, how the product would be better, just pulling together technologies that are feasible at the time point, and just go from there. I think that part is the part that is not the glorious part that can make media story, but that's the grind, the prototyping. And we still I guess, prototyping.
Yeah, I think prototyping is very interesting. Natalie, you talked about just the different experiences that the different workshops that you host through there. I'm actually interested in asking you about your corporate work in retail sustainability, and how do you prototype in that setting? Because you're looking after retail stores and change, you're looking after multiple products, but you're operating on a policy level almost. How do you prototype policy? How do you know that you're on the right track? How do you make sure that you're iterating fast enough? How do you know that you're solving the right problems? What's the input that you're looking for, and how do you assess against that?
I think in the corporate setting or retail space, we're not really at the point of prototyping. We're more like when we're setting strategy, I guess it's on the ideation or empathy stage where we get to speak to different stakeholders to understand their pain points, different functional teams. For example, commercial, when we're looking at sourcing more sustainably for paper, or for trying to replace single-use plastic in some of the products with an alternative. It's a long process of understanding why we're not doing it and what's the alternative, what's the cost difference, and what can be done by them, not by us, to mitigate the cost increment so that we can roll this out. So I feel like the whole process from the beginning to the end, we're not really able to intervene in any of the steps, but we're able to facilitate at any juncture. For example, at the beginning, we can provide them the data with what our peers are doing. For example, European brand, whether they're using this new refrigerant that's more climate friendly with lower greenhouse global warming potential. And then at the costing stage, we can let them know some of the strategies to do joint sourcing, so that, or even collaborate with other brands, so then we can have a bigger demand to press down the cost. So I feel like we work somehow like a consultant to the company, because we're able to have the sustainability lens on to let them know which area we need to intervene. And what's most interesting is working with some of the ESG rating agencies to let them rate our company in a way that is just and fair to us, by understanding what we're doing coming from each of the team's perspectives. Because I think this information collection part is oftentimes the most difficult. People are doing different sustainability initiatives not in the name of sustainability. They might be sourcing cage-free eggs because customers are shifting preferences to cage-free eggs. But then from the rating perspective, this is a valuable part of information, and we need to communicate it in a way that shows is tied with our whole strategic framework on our social responsibility part. So being able to join also, like what Walden said, connecting the dots, seeing the interconnections and how to present and communicate the data to the public, so that we can also be part of the movement of shifting customer preferences and pushing them towards a more sustainable lifestyle behavior.
So we started the session off by saying that citizenship covers many things, right? Obviously, both of you are working within the sustainability sphere. This is a global issue. So I want to start moving into some of the other subtopics within citizenship, one of which is global awareness and civic literacy, and how we engage with different stakeholders, right? I think it's interesting because this being such a broad topic, we are obviously going to creep into some of the other 21st century skills. We were talking about the creativity process just now. This has to do a lot with communication as well. Natalie, I'm going to start with you. I'll go straight. I mean, you saw this question, you didn't object to it, so I'm going to ask it how I wrote it. You sit on a government advisory council. You attend international events like COP. You lead the sustainability strategy for a global organization. These don't seem like typical behaviors of a climate activist. So how like, is there a right way to be a climate activist? Is there a right way to be a climate advocate? How do you practice that?
Don't seem typical. What do you mean?
Like most people, like like a lot of people see it as like, the protest side,
Okay.
right? You don't want to
So
engage with
I'm
the
not an
establishment,
activist, I'm
right?
an advocate.
Sure. Can you help us like differentiate if you see
Yeah.
there being a
So I think
difference?
activist is more like bringing forth your activism, like using some kind of action to push for changes, like protesting or demonstration. But I feel like advocate is more working within the institution or within some existing hierarchies to make change happen. The reason why I decided to become an advocate instead of an activist is, of course, I don't have the capability to become an activist because I am not good at protesting and organizing like large group of people, mobilize them. But I think on the advocate side, by sitting on, for example, a government panel, I know that it wouldn't help if there are 10 more climate protests in Hong Kong. Like people sitting in the government, they have a system and they have a usual way of how they make decisions. And it might be changed if there are like 7 million people on the street fighting for climate justice. But the decisions won't happen overnight. And I think by sitting there, I understand how the decision process making works and where to intervene at the right place at the right time. There are indeed members in the committee that are more on the activist end. They would give, for example, a very aggressive or a very exaggerated comment or like kind of opposing to what the government is doing at the moment. But I can definitely see how the officials are not responding actively to those demands, but rather incremental changes that will not happen overnight, but will happen maybe after 1 year. So I think this is what I've learned by just doing this kind of slow movement, by pressing day and night, by substantiating your argument with evidence. And even the corporate setting is very difficult to challenge a certain decision, even though I really want to phase out certain like single-use plastic products in our brands. We understand that it's not possible, but by introducing more alternatives, by using your innovation or creativity, you're able to find leeways or solutions around it that can still achieve the same outcome, but in a slightly different way. So I think this is the kind of merit of being an advocate, and also some of the learnings that we can get, which would in turn support climate movements. Like if we know how governments work, I can also like give these kind of advice or insights to my friends organizing climate protests so that they know what are the right demands to ask for, instead of asking for maybe phasing out fossil fuel tomorrow, like where we're still depending on fossil fuel for around 30% of electricity. We might ask for compulsory climate education in the syllabus by 2025, which is a more realistic demand. So I think these things would fit into the bigger picture, and we're just working in different positions for the same goal.
So you understand how governments and how incumbents work. Walden does too. But Walden, you're doing a lot of disruptive stuff. So it almost feels like in order for your vision to be executed in its fullest, in order for your daughter to, reap the benefits of what you're doing right now, you kind of have to defeat the incumbents. You kind of have to, challenge what has been the status quo. And it's the status quo because they've always dominated the resources and the capital and the scale globally. So how do you engage and how do you, I almost want to say, how do you fight this battle? How do you communicate and how do you just navigate this, complex industry?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one prescribed way. I think Natalie was kind of like alluding to it. Like the whole point, like the whole time she was talking, in my mind was like thinking, how President Obama would say, vote, don't boo. Like, he would go into these rallies and like people would boo whenever like Republicans get mentioned, and he would say, go vote. I think that's kind of the mentality that you need to go with. Unspun doesn't hold the mindset that we need to disrupt everything. There, like if you think about fashion and the role it plays, the creativity side, the design side, like it's an expression of self, and there is significant value, aesthetic, emotional value that still comes from the fashion industry. But the fact that climate and sustainability is not top of mind for a lot of fashion industry executives is worrying, right? Because we're running out of time. So I think for us, it's how do we leverage the consumer pool? How do we leverage the fact that we have, you know, growing awareness and growing support from the consumer side, and kind of channeling that energy to tell the industry, yo, you know, like your consumers are kind of more ready than you are. And like a lot of the executives in the fashion industry, candidly, they are, you know, motivated still, you know, within the capitalist system. So if you can provide them with the right incentives, change could come quickly. And so like you trying to go out to this sale, and like sometimes you see a wind and you try to, you know, borrow that energy. Like I think for us is seeing when tipping point begins to happen, and then you could work with bigger companies and influence the decision making in there. Because, you know, today we can sell all the jeans, we could be a Levi's like equivalent, but we would still making just insignificant impact within the climate equation. So we know if we want to make any meaningful impact before 2030, which is kind of at least an intermediate timeline for a lot of the climate activists and advocates, we're running out of time, and we kind of need to influence a lot of the big players. Otherwise, yeah, like we can disrupt, but it might be already too late.
You're talking about influence and impact, and even if you're operating at a Levi's like scale, that's going to be not significant enough.
Right.
I want to ask you both about leadership and how you see your roles within your respective spheres. Let's start with Walden, since you're talking about it already. You're kind of a disruptor. You're communicating with the incumbents that your consumers are ready, but at the same time, you are kind of at the forefront exploring what technology can bring. Right. So within that sort of theory of change, that impact equation, what role do you see yourself playing within the whole landscape?
Personally, or the company?
Both. Why not both?
Yeah, I think it's very tempting for us operating in the space to be quite cynical and quite jaded, because there isn't too much movement, and you can get really pessimistic about where the world is headed. I think now, like, we've made a conscious decision that we are always going to be hopeful, we're always going to be action oriented. We won't just sit on the sideline, but we also won't be the complaining group here. So I think that's kind of how we position ourselves. Like we set the examples of, you know, body scan jeans. Like it's like kind of crazy, but if you think about the grand scheme of like where we need to be climate wise and where the industry is, it's actually nowhere near crazy enough. So we set examples like that, but we also, you know, work with, you know, bigger fashion brands to see, because yeah, we're solving a systematic issue. So we just need to create a solution that's systematic to help them. I think the other side is just showing from a storytelling point of view what could be done, because if you break down fashion brands, they're basically just design and storytelling machines. It's basically what it is. So if we can kind of like be on par with them in terms of storytelling and design, then they kind of have to take some action. So like we create stories around being a certified B Corp. Like we are a 20-person company. If we can become certified B Corp, I'm sure you can do that too. we don't have one dedicated person for that, and we make it happen. And like most of these companies, thousands of people, you can't even dedicate 20 people to work on B Corp certification, like things like that. And like what Natalie's wearing, right? Like it's a local recycling company. They have massive capacity, 3-ton capacity per day, and like we have a small consumer base, and we can launch something. And like a lot of times when we can launch something, then it just goes a very long way for the fashion brand to pick them up.
So that's just on the company side. Yeah, you know, Unspun is playing the innovator role, trying to be the first mover, showing an example. What about you? What's your role in the conversation?
I guess to your point, I have diverse experiences, like coming from corporate world, being in, you know, fashion corporation before. I see myself more kind of being able to go between the two sides of like not getting too angry on the disruptor side, but being able to translate what that means for bigger companies and say, like, this is still fundamentally what we do, but I would use a different language to pitch to you because I know that you're motivated still within the capitalist system. So I would talk about cost saving, I would talk about efficiency, I would talk about maybe the target that you have to reach that's now tied to your KPI or your compensation. So I'll go there. So I think my role is just being able to translate the different worlds, or the old world, new world.
Same question to you. What's your role and what's Fair's role? What's your corporate role? Walk us through.
Yeah. I guess I could start with corporate first. I think being the first, like kind of first few hires in sustainability for my company, I feel like we have the responsibility to really set up the system from zero and to build best practices. Even though like Asian retailers are very, very much behind European and US, Australia counterparts, it actually reveals a lot of opportunities for us to improve, especially by modeling some of the already happening technologies from different parts of the world and even sourcing them to Hong Kong so that we can influence more of our peers and other partners to use the same technology by just driving the cost down. So I think this is a very valuable position where we get to bring people on board and to show people what can be done. For example, we're hoping to commit to science-based target, which is including scope 3 emissions, which is quite rare for Asian retailers. And so we just want to make sure to show that it's possible and also to instill that mindset to a lot of the new joiners and people in different departments. And on Fair side, we hope to lead on, continue leading on ecotourism, and perhaps not just in Hong Kong, we're also experimenting solutions around the Greater Bay Area and other major cities around the world, where whether we can kind of instill this concept of ecotourism and local tourism in them and upskill their local stakeholders to be a tour guide for their own district so that we can spread seeds around just to, especially in this post-COVID world where everyone is traveling abroad, whether that can still be growth area for local ecotourism. We believe there it is a yes. And we also hope to explore more solutions around regenerative tourism. Some of the actions we can take, for example, on wetland conservation and marine conservation, that tourists can also do something for the planet to leave it in an even better state, not just sustain, but also regenerate. And on a personal level, I wish I could continue, I don't know, advocating for different climate issues. I value my position in the government, especially because I know not a lot of people have these opportunities, and I'm trying actively to bring more youth voices in by recommending my friends to join these government FRC board schemes and recommend names when I know that there are openings, because I know that in the kind of post-COVID recovery, the emphasis on green recovery in Hong Kong is very, very low. We have our climate action plan for 2050, but there is not a lot of mention on training for ESG professionals or climate literacy in education. So I'm still working with my friends on improving this part by doing more climate advocacy training for the younger generation, and hoping that nature and climate education can eventually become compulsory in primary school or secondary school syllabuses.
So advocacy, awareness, knowledge, insights, leadership. I also hope that we'll get to a point where climate education is also compulsory. In the meantime, we have to stay involved, and we have to stay in the know, and we have to stay informed as well. So I do want to ask you both for some advice, because there are questions coming in too on how we learn about these things. And this was, also something that I wanted to ask you both. So, well, especially because climate literacy, digital literacy, media literacy, all of that is also under the purview of citizenship. So how do you both stay informed? And if you want to name drop like Instagram accounts or like, news sources that you look at, please feel free to. But it's a constant education process, science-based targets, all of those things. There's new research coming through. There's new technology coming through as well. So how do you stay informed? How do you keep up with all of the things that are coming out? And for someone who isn't in, the sustainability sphere, like you both are, what is the best way for us to stay informed so that at least we're on the right track to hopefully contributing to the changes that you both are working on? Maybe starting with you, Natalie.
I guess for the younger generation, definitely you can follow like some of the Instagram pages like Yango, UNFCCC, the UN main accounts, and Hong Kong 2050 is now is great. They're providing a lot of accessible contents related to climate change in Cantonese, because
Also for account too, just FYI.
No. And for news sources, I really like Carbon Brief. Carbon Brief is written by a group of scientists. They translate very complex IPCC climate reports into understandable language, layman language, so that you can also understand the science behind it. Ecobusiness is a great outlet for Asia Pacific related sustainability news. And last but not least, The Conversation. Yeah, The Conversation is a great newsletter where they compile a lot of latest scientific research and separate it by topic. So I really recommend subscribing to these newsletters, which are super useful and just keep you updated by adding to your email. But remember to delete cluttered emails, because that will reduce energy consumption in the data center. So yeah, clean your mailbox regularly to save carbon.
That is on my to-do list tonight. Walden, what about you?
Yeah, I'm more on the side of like the foundational understanding of climate. I had like three books that
Wow.
Prepared.
I had a library upstairs.
Yeah.
So the first one I'll start with would be Bill Gates' How to Avoid Climate Disaster. I think it's a very easy to read book. His audiobook, I think he narrates himself as well, so you get the extra sort of ounce of emotion from him. I think he has a unique way of just like breaking down the problem into digestible pieces that people can relate to. So this one, and then the other one, Speed and Scale. It's written by a venture capitalist, John Doerr. He basically break it down using an OKR structure to say, okay, like, basically 80-20, like what's the biggest bucket in climate and how do we avoid, like basically do mitigation. It's a bit of a more dry book, but it's a very systematic book for you to understand, what sectors we should be focusing on. And then a true climate activist, Greta's book. this book is actually highly visual. Like you see infographics, you see photos all along. This is a good book to keep. Also very systematic. Like it starts even from the beginning of like what climate science is, all the way to the work that people are doing around the world, and it's fairly easy to read. So those 3 books are, I think, foundational books that could get people started. I think Natalie's list complements with like the most up-to-date side of things.
Cool. I just learned that the colors of the climate book are the same brand colors of Unspun. So
Yeah, the climate stripes developed by James Hawkes, a climate scientist.
Yeah, I think it depicts
Introduce.
pre-industrial level, the global temperature to like where we're now, like showing the actual visual differences across the global climate.
I mean, this is a pretty great example of effective communication through brand messaging. So I think it's interesting because you're talking about, excuse me, the foundational side of things, and you're talking about like even the book written by someone coming from the VC sphere, approaching it from a more sort of business strategy perspective, and then there's the science based things. There's one question that has come in, and I want to throw it to you both, which is the flip side of the awareness piece. How do you engage with people who are naysayers? Maybe they're even climate deniers. Maybe they just don't see the same urgency as you do. And for someone who is so literate and deep into the field, obviously that is going to be pretty frustrating. So first of all, do you engage at all with people like this? Second of all, what is the tactic that you use in conversations like this? Starting with our advocate in the house.
I would recommend reading a book called What Do We Talk About When We Don't Talk About Global Warming? I think it's written by a Swedish writer. He's a kind of climate communicator and psychologist, where he talks about how to engage people who deny about climate change. So basically the skill is to not talk to them about climate change, just talk to them about other issues like health, air pollution, co-benefits that can be brought by climate action, or even economic growth. We know that by switching to LED lights or by switching to lower global warming potential refrigerants, we're able to save costs by just reducing energy consumption. So appealing to them by these points, and then just in the middle of it, they will be able to cut emissions unknowingly, even though they don't want to cut it. And just, for example, convincing people on a vegan diet or to eat more greens, just by talking to them about the planetary health diet. It is a concept pretty recently saying how we can eat good for ourselves and also good for the planet. So I think that is a good approach to just to bring people into the climate topic, because our diet and how we consume is so related to climate change, and at the same time it's so close to us, close to cultures, close to our own behavior and even our personal stories. So maybe by pitching them some of the personal stories related to a particular food ingredient, you can open to conversation, which will eventually link back to the climate issue.
Is that the same approach that you take, Walden?
I mean, obviously, like, have to understand where the person is coming from. But I think one thing that is kind of, I didn't have the chance to mention during this whole session is, like, this past year, I've been fundraising. And basically, all of the sectors within tech, they are having a significantly bad time, like, especially like crypto, Web3. But having said all of that, climate tech is extremely hot, like just in terms of investors' interest, like LP limited partners pouring money into VCs and wanting to make direct investments. It's like, if I were to put on a hat as just a pure capitalist that's just trying to game the system and like maximize my benefit, you need to take part in this. We can make the argument, you know, Web3, crypto, whatever has been fed, or like it's going through correction. Like most of the things within climate are fundamental 10+ year kind of projects that, you know, as Natalie mentioned, has cost benefit. And there are a lot of projects where this is the capitalist answer, and this is the only capitalist answers as well. So if knowing nothing, I would say climate is the future, and like you really need to get in.
I have a question from the audience since you're talking about capitalism.
Sure.
And I think this is going to be a lot of what, you know, you mentioned B Corp as well. How do you balance business targets with social impact targets? I'm going to come to you now later because you're looking at like the corporate side too, but for you know, a startup, how do you work with that?
Yeah, I think like the side that you need to consider, especially in our space, is historically it's more volume means more revenue. That means, you know, that's the capitalist answer. Like, and that model, it depletes planetary boundaries, and it's, you know, it's using a lot of the resources. I think the way to think about this is like, what can we do to create value that we can still capture a part of that value by not using as much resource. Like if you frame it that way, then I think you can come up with a lot of creative solution. Like, you know, same fabric that we kind of deplete resource from planet Earth to create. We can go through re-commerce, we can break it down into pattern pieces, do color block, hype it up, and you can kind of like generate like extra revenue on top of that. And you're still kind of using the same resource. At least you won't be doubling the resource that you use. So I think if you frame it around kind of resource use and decoupling volume from revenue, I think that's one creative way to go about it.
Okay. What about you?
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah. So how do you balance business targets with social impact targets?
I think I guess the first stage of it is pretty easy, because when we're reaping the lowest hanging fruit in sustainability, it's easy to generate cost savings. But then for the second wave of it, after you've done all the LED light transition, it's down to investments that have a longer return on investments, or even some of them, they don't have a return on investment. So how do we communicate that to our C-suite to convince them to do it, even though ROI is like 10+ years, even though it doesn't even pay back? So I think a lot of the times it has to be justified by how consumers are behaving and how we're managing risk. I think managing risk is a big piece of it, because even though this thing may not have any ROI, but it can prevent us from more damages from physical or transition climate risks. For instance, rising electricity prices, even though we're not enjoying the benefits now, when the electricity prices quadruple, maybe in 2-3 years time, we will be saving that. We're preventing those future costs. For waste, obviously, municipal solid waste charging is coming to Hong Kong next year. So we're already now preparing for that, communicating with our store managers. We need you to start doing this now, because we need to prevent the cost increment in 1-2 years time. And we need to take up the recycling facilities as soon as possible. Otherwise, there will, like, these facility spaces will all be occupied by our competitors. So I think it's like preventing us suffering from future climate damages or risk, and also trying to communicate the environmental message there and how it links with our population. Because even though we may not operate in countries or regions that suffer the most from climate impact, there might be interconnections, geopolitical connections between different regions that will ultimately affect us. So yeah, I think drawing these connections and visualizing the impact to communicate them.
we are almost at time. So there's still a couple of questions that we probably won't be able to get to because we have been super on point with letting everybody go right at 8:15 every single time. So I'm going to try to sum up all of the things that we talked about with one question. And this is going to be a broad question because we have talked about a lot of things. We've talked about climate. We've talked about a lot about climate. We've talked about civic engagement and being aware and active, staying informed, media literacy, digital literacy, global awareness, leadership, vision, mission. Now also talking about, how you communicate a message, how you pick a slightly different perspective to frame things. So I would like to get a slightly different perspective on how to frame citizenship from you both. This is a question that we have asked everybody throughout the series. And this is going to be the last question of the current Future Skills Roundtable series. If you were to teach someone citizenship, which encompasses all of the subtopics that we just went through above, how would you do it? I'm going to start with Walden.
I thought it would start with you.
This is such a hard one.
We sent the questions to them in advance, so
Yeah. Doesn't make it easier.
it's true. I'm happy to start with you if you
No.
have.
Sorry, say the last part of the question
How would
again.
you teach?
If you were to teach someone citizenship as it encompasses all of the different subtopics we talked about, literacy, engagement, awareness, leadership, operating and thinking on a global level and our role within it, communicating all of these, the need for change and impact. How would you teach that?
I don't know. I don't know if we can teach it. Like, I think I'm probably, as you can tell from this, whatever you want to call it, panel, like that. I'm not very big on like spoon feed. Like I'll break down it into syllabus and kind of teach it to get in. That makes for something that's not scalable. But I remember spending time in between my business school years and in Japan. They were hit by the tsunami and the earthquake that happened a couple of years ago, and they were trying to revitalize. And there you could see buildings that were like bent from the wave of tsunami. And obviously, climate change and tsunami, I'm not saying they're directly related. They are not. But you could see, visually how if climate change, a lot of the predictions were to happen, how that's going to impact people's livelihoods. Like people actually have to move away. Like I saw a bus being slammed into a hostel in those parts of the world. And like if you see images like that, I think it's very hard for you to kind of not take action and to learn about the other complementary aspects of it. I think the best thing you can do is to start there and kind of plant the seed and allow children to be curious. And most of them are much more digital savvy than I was, and they can dig up YouTube videos. They can dig up like that whole fact finding part of it. I think once you get them motivated and interested and intrigued, that's just going to feed on itself. So yeah, I think start there. Like start with something that's experiential. A lot of what Natalie's work is focused on has that component as well. Yeah, like in our world, in fashion, seeing is believing. I think the same applies to a lot of how we can motivate people, the next generation.
So Walter subscribes to the shock value and
to shock.
I know, to visceral impacts and just making people aware and being able to see and witness the issues and the problems. What about you?
I guess along similar lines, through so we believe in the power of experiential learning. That's why we started FAIR. And for global issues like climate change, hunger, poverty, I think it's only close to you when you are close to nature, when you care about communities, when you feel that you're part of a global citizen. By like creating some kind of eco tour or even community tour experience, we can allow students or children to immerse in these environments and feel that they belong to part of it. I think one useful like workshop or activity to let them do is to set them with a task before venturing into a new place. It can be a country park or can be a rural village. For example, the task is to build or enhance climate resilience of that particular park or protect a certain species, and to let them experiment, let them think, let them speak to villages or other stakeholders, government officials around that area, and to explore and find their own solutions. That would be able to build the kind of togetherness and let them take hold and take ownership of their citizenship and be part of the change. I guess throughout my secondary school education, I didn't really have the chance to build something on my own or take pride in doing something that can improve the well-being of a certain community, be it a nature species or an actual like living community. By creating these shared experiences, we would understand that we are part of the planet Earth and we're not that far apart, even though we're facing very different challenges in different communities. For example, some of us are facing heat waves or some of us are undergoing flooding in Pakistan. But by understanding that we have the same root, and by doing something with our own hands and with our own compassion, we'll be able to connect everyone back to this concept of being part of a citizen, being part of the crew of planet Earth.
I think that is a great motivational speech to end our session on. So thank you to both Natalie and Walden for taking the time, and obviously to Walden for hosting us at your new store.
Thank you.
If you are based in Hong Kong and you have not come to Unspun yet, come to Unspun. And
get a discount.
Yeah.
Kidding.
Try out some of the awesome tech that Walden's working on, and of course sign up for some of various eco tours too.
And change your Zoom background to the climate stripe. You can search for climate stripes online and change it, and then everyone see it, will ask you about it. Then you can open this climate conversation to more people.
Nice. This marks the end of our Future Skills Roundtable series for now. So we will be back, I think, I hope, with more awesome content. I've learned a lot from you both. I've learned a lot from all of our speakers. We call it future skills. They're not really future skills, they're present skills, because 21st century skills, we've been in the 21st century for 22 years now, almost 23. So these are really, it really is a present skill roundtable. And so this is part of our mission to bring awareness and communication and learning of these skills into the mainstream. So hopefully we'll continue doing more, and hopefully we'll continue building more cool experiential learning programs that are fun and that reach a lot of people and lead to the impacts that we all need to get to. For now, this is it. Happy holidays, stay warm, and we'll see you again very soon. Thank you very much for joining. And if you want to share more of this content, all of this will be up on our social media. We have a new directory now. So you'll please check in and spread the word. Show everybody what these two are doing and what everybody else that we've featured in our series have been doing. So thank you. We'll see you again soon next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Vince and the team behind the scenes.